Okay, thank you, Jay. Good morning, everybody. I'm happy to introduce our speaker to you today, Justin Parmenter. Uh, you may have heard of him first through his editorials on education in the Charlotte Observer. In fact, he has been an education activist, which I imagine he's going to talk about some today. He's been a member of our community for more than 4 years, and he will speak today for about 20 minutes. And during that time, you can write any questions you have on chat, which is the icon in the bottom of your screen in the middle, or on most people's screens, I think. And you can even write questions after he finishes. Be sure that your question is in the form of a question and try to keep it brief. So, Justin, I'll let you speak for 20 minutes, and then we'll try to do Q&A for as much time as we can. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carol, and I'm happy to be here with you all this morning. I see a lot of familiar names and faces, and it's great to see you all this morning. I want to talk about my path to becoming an education, I'm not sure if activist or advocate is the right word, but you know, how I ended up doing that kind of thing. And I also want to talk about one of the things I love hearing from you all when you do this is people's experiences with spirituality and religion at earlier times in their life and how they ended up here. And for me, I think that's a really important part of my story too, because as you're going to hear, I've had a lot of experiences in my childhood and earlier adulthood that were very difficult, and had a lot of baggage wrapped up with some of my experiences with churches and religions before that kind of kept me isolated and on my own for a long time until I found my way to UU a few years back. So those are the kind of the two things that I want to talk about, and I'm just going to jump into it, and I'll try to make sure that we're done in time to have some questions before I think we need to be finished and off by 11. Is that right, Jay?
But as close as possible, yeah.
Okay. All right. So yeah, I'll just start at the beginning, I guess. I was raised in a military family. My father was in the Marine Corps when I was born. It was a very conservative, politically conservative and religious family, raised going to the Presbyterian Church. And you know, I was taught that that our people had the monopoly on truth. I was taught the heaven and hell way, that, you know, heaven was for the predestined, the chosen few, and that hell was for everyone else. And I didn't question any of that for a long time, because I was taught that was the truth, and that, you know, I was raised to not really ask questions and just to accept what I was told and follow it. That works for a while. At least it worked for a while for me when I was young. And then as I got older, a couple things happened. I was attending a private school in St. Louis on a scholarship. My family didn't have a lot of money, but had managed to finagle our way into an exclusive Christian private school. And the school ran out of, well, they told us that they ran out of scholarship money. I'm not sure what really happened behind the scenes, but the summer before my 10th grade year, I transitioned into public school. And in St. Louis at the time, there was a desegregation program going on. We lived in the county, and there was, you know, a deseg program. So I started taking a ride into the city and attending school. And so, you know, my life experience has changed a great deal. I went from this, you know, insulated white privileged bubble into a much more diverse educational experience. And along with that came exposure to different political ideas. And what was going on at the time was the first Iraq War. And I can remember, you know, up until that point, I had just accepted this line that, you know, the United States was defending Kuwait from aggression, you know, that we were just trying to stand up for the little guy. And I got to this new school and started talking with other people about what was happening in the world. And very quickly adopted the no blood for oil view of what was going on there. And along with that, started doing some reading, Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau, and starting to get exposure to literature that really spoke to me, and just kind of changed the way that I saw the world and some philosophies that I had. And so I started to diverge, I think, a little bit from that religious upbringing at that point. I went to college in St. Louis at the University of Missouri, St. Louis. I got a degree in English. I didn't really have any marketable skills that I was aware of beyond, being a pretty good reader and writer. And so about halfway through college, I was trying to figure out what I was going to do when I graduated. And I decided to apply to become a Peace Corps volunteer. And at the time, it wasn't that I necessarily wanted, had any desire to help the world or to be a teacher or anything like that. Honestly, I just wanted to travel, and I didn't have any money, and I just wanted to have some adventures and do something big and away from home, And so I ended up, a month after I graduated from college in 1995, I ended up going to Albania, which is in Eastern Europe. It's right between Greece and Italy, borders with the former Yugoslavia. And so in the mid 90s, just shortly after the fall of communism, I landed in this little tiny former communist country that I didn't know anything about, and just, had an open mind and was ready to have some new experiences. And based on my, background in English and having worked in the writing lab at the university doing some tutoring, I was eligible to be an English teacher. So I hadn't had any experience teaching. I didn't, necessarily have a life goal of being a teacher, but, I was given a job of being a high school English teacher in a small town of about 5,000 people in southern Albania in the 90s. And, I was very isolated. I was living there. There were no other Americans in the town when I was there. No other foreigners to speak of. I think there was a Norwegian missionary that I caught a glimpse of every once in a while. But, through that experience, I developed a really deep appreciation and respect for diverse cultures and traditions and languages. And I think, that idea that I had been really raised with, that, we have the monopoly on the good things in life and the path to heaven and all that kind of thing, which really kind of froze out other cultures and other traditions. I started to, I think, really put that behind me, and that desire to honor and value other people really became a part of my fabric in that short time in Albania, almost 25 years ago now, I guess. And that has really, ever since then, all the experiences I've had since then and continuing today to, being a classroom teacher in Charlotte, North Carolina, it has continued to shape my interactions with other people ever since that time, and seeing myself continually, not just as, as a teacher, but as a learner and as someone who wants to, gain from my experiences and interactions with other people and not just impart to them. So my service as a Peace Corps volunteer in Albania ended about 3 months early in 1997. It's a long story that I don't think we have time for today. But there was a massive civilian uprising in Albania in March of 1997 that ended with a military evacuation of all the Americans who were there. I left on a Marine Corps helicopter. And so it was a very turbulent time, and it was a very unexpected way to end what was a beautiful experience that I was having. And so I ended up back in the United States unexpectedly, had no idea what I wanted to do, hadn't had time to make plans or apply for anything. And I came back to this country that felt very foreign to me. And it was interesting, this just sort of complete reverse culture shock. I can remember walking into a grocery store and the doors opened automatically when I walked through it. And, there was a whole aisle of peanut butter, like the sheer number of varieties of peanut butter was just completely overwhelming to me. It didn't make any sense to me why people would need that many options. So it was just like this really strange experience to be going through. And I just wanted to be gone again, to be honest. And so I started looking for a way to continue my international adventures. And this was in the 90s, and the internet wasn't really, as big of a deal as it is now. And so I subscribed to an international teaching jobs newsletter. It was a little like print thing that came to my mailbox and once a month or something. And so I applied for a job in Istanbul teaching, and I ended up getting that job. And I think I was back in the US maybe 6 months or so, and then I left again. And I landed in Istanbul all on my own, not working for any American organization or anything like that. And so I ended up being there for about a year and a half. Met my wife there. My wife's name is Arzu. We've been married for 20 years or so now. And so, I was able to continue my adventures and teaching still there, and continue that learning experience, living in a predominantly Muslim country for the first time. And so that was a really interesting chapter of my life as well. But I wanted to come back to the US and go to school. And we weren't sure what we were going to do. And so I ended up getting into a graduate program in Arizona. And so I came back to the United States. And shortly after I left, my girlfriend at the time in Turkey, we decided that we didn't want to be separated from each other. And so, I worked on her visa, and we decided that she was going to come over and we were going to get married and settle down together. And at that time, I asked, I ran that by my parents, and I decided that I was going to ask the pastor of the Presbyterian church that my parents had been members of for quite a while to perform the ceremony. And I didn't anticipate there were going to be any issues with that, because our family had been members there for a long time, and I felt like maybe I could use some of their clout and he'd be fine with it. Well, the pastor didn't say anything for a long time. And then I got a 7-page letter in the mail from him. And it was 7 pages filled with biblical references, all about how just being in love with someone wasn't enough. And it centered on this verse about being unequally yoked with unbelievers or something like that. And it was all about, it was all about that, he felt like me marrying this woman was a mistake, and that he wasn't going to be a part of anything like that. And I know that, that this, what I'm doing this morning is really supposed to focus on positive claims about myself rather than negative statements about others. And I don't intend really any criticism of him. I understand that that's probably a very common view. But I do think it's important context to my journey to you all, to say that experience of being informed by that pastor, that I was making a big mistake by marrying someone that I was in love with and embracing an intercultural international marriage because she was on the wrong team, and that our team had a monopoly on truth, and that we needed to just stick with our own kind. After having lived overseas for 4 years and developed this really sincere belief that life was about embracing the differences and respecting other people, that reaction was just so repugnant to me and counter to the values that I had been cultivating in myself that I didn't go back to church for probably 2 decades after that. I still got married though. We found a judge to go up in the mountains in Flagstaff, Arizona, and marry us for $100. And so that worked out, and we're still happily married, 2 decades later. So, but that's how that worked out. And so we ended up, Arzu and I ended up, I was in a graduate program in Flagstaff, Arizona, which was for former Peace Corps volunteers. And the deal was that I committed to teaching on the Apache Reservation in Eastern Arizona, and going to summer school in Flagstaff on in the summers around those years that I was teaching there. And so I got my graduate degree and my first, legitimate American teaching certificate. And then we moved to Charlotte in 2002. So we've been here almost 20 years now. I've been teaching middle school English in Charlotte ever since we arrived here, and doing that happily. Right now I work at Waddell Language Academy, which is, I've been there since 2006. Waddell is a foreign language immersion magnet school where kindergartners enroll and they study either Chinese, French, German, or Japanese, in an immersion format. So they're learning math and science and everything in that target language. And they're fluent by the time they get to middle school. And, I love working there because I feel like when I started working there in the 2000s, it was, right around the end of the Bush presidency, which seemed awful at the time. I didn't have any idea how much worse it could get. But anyway, at the time, I think there was this really view of Americans that, we thought that we were running the globe and that we could, go places and sort of push people around. And I felt like this school that was teaching children that they were a part of a global community, that they weren't the center of it, they were a part of it, was a really important way of kind of reshaping, that worldview that so many Americans had. And so I love working there, and I was just teaching along and just doing my thing in the classroom for many years. And then about 5 years ago, what happened was I ended up applying for a fellowship with an organization called the North Carolina Teacher Voice Network. And it's defunct now, but I was with that organization for a couple of years. And the North Carolina Teacher Voice Network had a very simple philosophy, and their philosophy was that education policy is better when it's informed by people who actually work in schools, so that the laws that are passed and the budgets that are written need and various other policies that involve education need to have that insight and that perspective of people who are going to be carrying out those policies or using that funding to try to do their jobs. And it sounds so simple, but it's very rarely how it actually plays out. And so this organization had a requirement that we would write one thing per year, whether it was a blog post or an article, an editorial, that they were going to help us with that, and we were going to commit to writing one piece per year. And so I had never done anything like that before. And this was 2016. I remember it was about the end of the school year, and I was looking around like, what am I going to write about? And right about then, we were going through the standardized testing phase of the school year. And so I started looking around, and I remember I was administering a 3-hour reading test, and I was watching my students, and just you have a lot of time to think when you're administering a test like that. And so I was reflecting on that experience and how many of these kids had worked so hard all year, and some of them were going to get a score that was going to carry a feeling of failure with it, and they were going to. Some of them I knew from past experience would feel devastated by that and would feel like, their entire year was summed up by this one failing test result, and how problematic that was. And so I wrote an editorial, I remember, for the Charlotte Observer. And I remember taking it to my principal and saying, hey, can you read this and tell me if this is okay with you if I do this? Which is funny because I would never, ask anyone for permission to really say anything at this point. But at the time, it was such a, it felt so taboo to be talking about standardized testing. It's a subject that, that we're taught to be very kind of tight-lipped about. And so I remember getting that thing published, and the feedback that I got was, from students and from parents saying, thank you for voicing something that all of us have been thinking, but no one is really willing to say. And so after that, I continued to do a lot more of that. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, just so we don't run out of time at the end. But, I started to write more and more about the classroom experience, about policy issues and things that happened with my students, and really found my voice, I think, that way. started speaking a lot at Board of Education meetings, participating on panels and things like that, talking with the media more. And as I did more and more of that kind of work, and getting a lot of more media requests for interviews and things like that, I noticed that often people were asking me to weigh in on issues that I might have an opinion about, but I wasn't necessarily the right person to ask. I was just someone they recognized my name, and so that they would call me. But, you know, for example, if someone wanted a quote about the impact of discipline policies on students of color, I might have some thoughts about that, but was it really right for a white male to be consistently the go-to on every issue, you know, including those type of issues of racial equity and things like that. And so, you know, I began to think more and more about the importance of empowering other people to share their insights and not just to dominate those conversations on my own, and to really be mindful about checking my ego and thinking about, am I doing this because it's right for me to do it, or am I doing it because, you know, I like the way it makes me feel or the feedback that I get. And so a couple of years ago, I ran for a position with the North Carolina Association of Educators, which is our professional organization for teachers in North Carolina. It's the largest one that we have. And I was elected to a position in the region, which includes Mecklenburg, but also counties like Union County and Gaston County and Stanley County and Lincoln and Montgomery, places where teachers don't feel comfortable speaking up about issues. And so, you know, now I'm focusing a lot on that work and trying to, you know, help encourage other people to not be afraid to talk about their realities and what they're seeing in the classroom, and to try to ensure that that all voices are represented in this work. And so that's kind of what I'm focusing on now. Real quick, before I run out of time, I just want to say that, you know, the way that I ended up at UU was, it was shortly after the inauguration of our last president. And I was feeling this complete despair and hopelessness and loneliness. And I felt like, you know, what I needed was to be a part of a community of people where there was some hope, and where other people understood kind of how I was feeling and what I was going through. And also, I wanted for my children to be able to form their own views of the world and wrestle with spirituality. And I realized that they were not going to be able to do that sitting at home. And so we showed up one Sunday and felt so welcomed and loved the music and loved the community that we found there. And, you know, I have to say, over the past year, I have not been the most engaged member. I may be the most disengaged member, in fact. The online burnout is very real. And I know a lot of you can probably relate to that as well. But I still feel very blessed to be part of such a loving community, and one that doesn't claim to have the monopoly on truth, but rather embraces that questioning and seeking is a normal and acceptable part of spiritual growth. And I'm really happy to be able to do that alongside you all. So I think that might be the end of my spiel. Not sure if we have time for any questions or if there were any.
I think we have time for just one or two. And thank you so much, Justin. Let me jump right into this. This says, yours is a very fascinating journey. Are you close to your family of origin today? And have your transformations inspired them to evolve in their thinking?
We are very close. We're very close. You know, I think there are certain things that we've recognized that it maybe is better for our relationship that we don't always jump right into conversations about. And, you know, I remember a few months back, my parents were in town. Maybe it was a couple of years ago, actually. My mom came with me to the service. My dad elected to go somewhere else, you know, in town while he was visiting. So, you know, it's not, I would say that there is, you know, we're at a point where I have to just respect that they are who they are, and but that I need to be who I need to be also. And honestly, as a child that's raised with a certain tradition, I think, you know, I'm 48 years old now, but there's still a lot of that in me. I'm still sometimes so wrapped up in wanting to please my parents and be the person that they want me to be, that it can be a really hard experience to break free from that. And even now, you know, it's not easy. So it's complicated.
Okay, one more question that maybe just get a quick answer from. As part of your journey, tell us about one way that you've been able to integrate what you've learned or seen through your travels into your daily life.
Into my daily life as a teacher?
In general, your daily life.
Well, I would say one way is just by continuing to always be really open to new experiences, trying new foods, you know, learning about where people are from and about different cultures. That's something that I still am fascinated by to this day. So I think that's always going to be with me.
Okay. Well, I want to keep us on our schedule because we have the service to start in about 15 more minutes. So I thank you so much, Justin. I and many others have been really looking forward to hearing what you have to say so we can hear you in person and not just read you in the newspaper. So we look forward to when we can all be together and can see you again face to face. And thank you for your presentation today. And
Absolutely.
thank you for everybody else. Come back next month on the fourth Sunday in May, and we will have one of our young people to speak then. So thank you and goodbye, everybody.